Hello, Richard here, and today I want to show you the latest acquisition I got from my home workshop, which is this rather interesting floor standing pillar drill, pedestal drill, whatever you want to call it. This one I acquired off Facebook Marketplace, which is quite a good place I find to get tools from. And this one's quite interesting. This is actually a 1973 Toolcraft 452. Now, what's interesting about that, you might well ask? Well, quite a bit actually. This, for its day, was an extremely innovative tool. Obviously, it's a drill. It has a drill here, and you can move the quill up and down, and you can do drilling things with it. But also, it has this up here, which is a secondary spindle, and this spindle actually goes up to 25,000 RPM. And what you can do is you can rotate this around, having unlocked it at the back first, and attach a router bit here, and you've then got a table router. Now, I don't have the router bits for it, and I'm not really intending to use this as a router, but the facility's there. And the way it does it is, in the drill head here, the motor is fully contained within the drill head, which is the design we're kind of getting back to now with some of the latest Bosch bench drills. Traditionally, a drill would have the motor hanging off the back, and then you'd have a pulley system, and then the quill and the spindle. But this has got it all self-contained. So if we put it back the other way, just lock that off on the back. There's a lever at the back. So when we bring the quill down, the entire motor's moving. This here that you can see, that is actually the motor casing there. And the way they get the router spindle to do 25,000 RPM is there's actually a secondary gearbox at the top of the motor. So the motor's in here, direct drive to the chuck, and there's a secondary gearbox here, which drives this. Another interesting little innovation that they've got is the chuck key, which lives up there. And you would use the chuck key to do your chucking and keying and things like that. When you're done, you pop the chuck key in this hole, and there's a micro switch inside here, which means that when the chuck key's out, it won't turn on. I haven't got it plugged in, but if I tried to start it, it wouldn't start because you need to put the chuck key in. So it stops you leaving the chuck key in the chuck. Now, having a look at the front here, you've got a variable speed control here, so you can wind up the speed from fairly slow to really quite fast. There's a quill lock here, so you can put the quill at a given height, turn that to lock the quill, and then there's a depth stop. Well, this is quite nice as well because you can actually read off the depth. So you could undo this, move the little pointer to the depth you require, say 3 inches, and that's your depth stop. Now on the front here as well, there's a little speed indicator, or there was until I took it out. It's quite a clever little idea, really. This little bit of red rubber actually wraps around the potentiometer so that as you wind it backwards and forwards, the idea is this would sort of feed in and out of this little slot. Over the last 50 years, it's turned to sort of quite hard plastic, so it was binding things up. But that's what that was there, so it would actually give you an idea of speed. So I'll just give you a better look at the side view. There's a lever at the back here. If I loosen that, then that basically frees up the head, and then the head can be rotated through whatever angle. So you could actually put it on an angle to drill at an angle as well. And there's a scale on the side so you can read where it's set. Now, overall, this wasn't in that bad condition when I got it. It was just a bit rusty, dusty, needed a bit of tweaking here and there. Now, the pillar had some light rusting, and that was just cleaned up with some emery cloth or aluminium oxide cloth, sort of shoe shine style. So that was cleaned up, and then steel wooled and oiled, so that came up quite well. The bed was quite rusty. I'll show you a picture of that. Now, with that, I decided to hand scrape the table. It's not hand scraped to be flat or anything, it's just hand scraped to clean the rust off. Now, if you've been following the channel for any length of time, you'll know I quite like hand scraping cast iron when I can. People often ask me, why would I hand scrape this rather than just sand it or mill it flat? Well, the reason I wouldn't mill it flat is I don't have a milling machine, so that's that simple answer. Sanding, I just don't like sanding rust. I just find it a nasty, horrible process. And I much prefer scraping. I like scraping. Maybe it's slower. I'm not sure it's that much slower than sanding, really. Sanding is quite monotonous. But one of the main reasons I like to do hand scraping is it's one of those things where you've just got to practice it. It's a bit like MIG welding. When I learned to MIG weld, I kind of knew what I had to do. I knew to pull the trigger and to keep things moving and to have a weld pool and all the other things. But until you've done a good couple of 100 hours of it, you just don't get the knack of it. And it's the same with scraping, really. Scraping's quite easy to do. Anyone can scrape. If you get a decent sharp scraper, anyone can scrape a surface. And anyone can scrape it to within a pretty good tolerance. But to really get that sort of fine knack of it just takes time. So any opportunity I get to scrape something, I just view it as improving my skills. And another reason is I just think it looks great. I really like the look of it. And it's a nice finish to work on. when you put a vise on it and it's moving around, everything just moves nicely and it all feels very slick. So that's basically why I would hand scrape this rather than trying to sand it. Now, I expect you're dying to know what this thing sounds like when it's fired up. And it's pretty noisy. It's not the smoothest running thing on the planet. I mean, bear in mind, it's 50 years old. And it's also got the permanently engaged 25,000 RPM router gearbox at the top of the motor. So that makes quite a lot of noise as well. But we'll get it fired up so you can get an idea of what it sounds like. And we'll see if we can drill a hole in this piece of steel I've got in the chuck here. Now, this is an 8mm drill, which is 5/16. So let's fire it up, have a listen and see how it does. Well, that did a pretty good job on that. Certainly good enough for the sort of thing I'm going to be doing, which is fairly light work. And it's worth saying as well that this is from 1973 and it was really pitched as a woodworking tool more than a metalworking tool. I mean, case in point being that it also came with this. Luckily, the guy had this as well, which is a mortising attachment, which is one of the optional accessories you get for this. So might come in handy one day. So yeah, it's a fairly light duty bit of kit. It's primarily for woodworking, though it will handle light metal work as well, which is good because that's mainly what I'll be using it for. But there you go. That's the Toolcraft 1973 452 floor standing pillar drill.